It was just another busy afternoon in the small town of Maple Grove. The sun was bright, and a warm breeze carried the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. People rushed by on the sidewalks holding coffee cups, shopping bags, and phones pressed to their ears. No one seemed to notice the man sitting quietly on the corner, his back against the wall of the coffee shop. He was easy to overlook. His clothes were old and torn, hanging off his thin body like they barely remembered the shape they were supposed to hold. His shoes were mismatched, one missing its sole completely. His beard was long and messy, and his hands were rough and weathered. But if someone looked closely, really looked, they would see that his eyes were not empty like some might expect. They were tired. Yes, but there was a kind of quiet pride deep inside them, like he still carried something important even though the world had taken everything else. Most people didn't bother looking. They crossed the street, or stared at their phones when they passed him. Some dropped a few coins in the old coffee cup sitting next to him without making eye contact. Others just whispered to their friends and kept walking. Across the street, two police officers stood laughing outside their patrol car. They were young, both not much older than college kids, and they carried themselves with the kind of loud, careless energy that made people either laugh with them or stay out of their way. Officer Barnes, tall with short red hair, nudged his partner, Officer Mills, a shorter man with a sharp grin. "Look at that guy," Barnes said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Bet he thinks he's some kind of king of the sidewalk." Mills chuckled. "King? More like a general of garbage." They laughed harder, not caring that some people glanced at them with frowns. The homeless man didn't even flinch. He sat still, his eyes looking out at the street, like he didn't hear them at all, or like he was used to this kind of cruelty. Among the small crowd of people was a woman named Sarah, who had been waiting for her coffee. She watched the scene unfold with a knot growing in her stomach. She didn't know why, but something about the man felt different. Important, even. Like there was a story hidden under all that dirt and silence. And for some reason she couldn't look away. Officer Barnes crossed the street with long, heavy steps, and Officer Mills followed close behind. They stopped right in front of the homeless man, their shadows falling over him. "Hey, soldier," Barnes said with a fake serious voice, giving a sloppy salute. "Reporting for duty, sir." Mills laughed and added, "Permission to sit around and smell up the place, General." People nearby chuckled nervously. Some turned away, pretending not to hear. No one stepped in. Sarah gripped her coffee cup tighter, her heart beating faster. She couldn't believe how cruel they were being, but she felt frozen, unsure what to do. The homeless man slowly lifted his head. His eyes, deep and tired, met Barnes for a brief second. He said nothing, just gave a slow, almost sad shake of his head. Barnes didn't like being ignored. He bent down, getting right in the man's face. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're giving secret orders to your army of rats." Mills snorted. Maybe he thinks he's still fighting a war. Poor guy probably lost his mind along with everything else. Still, the homeless man stayed silent. Only one sentence slipped from his cracked lips, spoken so softly that Sarah had to strain to hear it. "Respect is earned, not given." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavier than anyone expected. Barnes and Mills stopped laughing for just a second, then quickly brushed it off with more jokes. "Oh, we respect you, General Garbage," Mills said with an exaggerated bow. "All hail." They both burst into loud laughter again, drawing more attention from people passing by. Some shook their heads, some just walked faster, but no one, not one person, stepped in to help. Sarah's chest ached with guilt. She looked at the homeless man, wondering what kind of life he must have lived before ending up here. There was something about the way he sat, straight-backed even in the dirt, that didn't match the picture of a broken man. She thought of her own grandfather, who had fought in a war long before she was born. She thought about the medals he kept in a box, and the pride he always carried, even when he needed help walking. Sarah wished she had the courage to say something, anything, but fear and doubt kept her rooted to the spot. The two officers finally grew bored with their cruel show. Barnes clapped his hands together. "All right. Time to move along, Grandpa Hero. This street doesn't need your special kind of leadership." The homeless man slowly stood up. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He just stood tall, even as his bones seemed to creak under the weight of the year. As he did, Sarah caught a glimpse of something around his neck, a thin chain, hidden under his shirt. She couldn't see what hung from it, but she had a feeling it was something important, something he kept close even when everything else was gone. The officers didn't know. They were already planning their next move, and it wasn't going to be kind. Officer Barnes reached for his radio and spoke into it like he was starring in a cop show. "We have a loiterer refusing to leave private property, requesting permission to remove him." The man didn't say a word. He simply stood there, calm and still, while the people on the sidewalk pretended not to notice what was happening right in front of them. Sarah's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream that he wasn't hurting anyone, that he had every right to sit there, but her voice stayed locked inside. Permission crackled back over the radio, and without waiting another second, Barnes grabbed the homeless man's arm roughly. "Come on, General," he said with a cruel grin. "Time for a ride to the station." Mills snapped the handcuffs onto his wrists with a loud clink. The man winced slightly but didn't fight back. He only nodded once, like he had already expected this to happen, like it wasn't the first time. "You'll learn," the man said softly, almost like he was talking to himself. Barnes snorted. Yeah, save it for the judge." The two officers led him toward the patrol car. People on the sidewalk stepped aside without a word. Some whispered. A few shook their heads, but no one moved to help him. Sarah watched, feeling helpless and furious all at once. The image of the homeless man, proud but broken, hurt but silent, stuck in her mind like a splinter she couldn't pull out. As they passed her, Sarah caught another glimpse of the chain around the man's neck. This time, the light caught on something small and shining tucked under his shirt. It wasn't junk. It looked like a medal. Sarah's chest tightened. She thought again of her grandfather's stories, of the medals he kept safe even when everything else was falling apart. The car door slammed shut, and the officers sped away, leaving only silence and the sour taste of shame in the air. Sarah stood there for a long time, her coffee cold in her hand. Somehow, deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of the story, not even close. Something bigger was about to happen, something none of them would be able to ignore. The next morning, the small courthouse in Maple Grove was busier than usual. People whispered to each other as they filled the old wooden bench. Word had gotten around fast. A homeless man had been arrested outside the coffee shop, and the two young officers were proud of what they had done. Sarah sat in the back row, her hands clenched together in her lap. She had tossed and turned all night, unable to forget the way the man had stood tall even while everyone around him treated him like trash. She didn't know why she had come to the hearing. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was both. Officer Barnes and Officer Mills stood near the front of the room, laughing quietly. Barnes leaned close to Mills and joked, "Maybe the judge will make him general of the jail too." Mills snickered. "He can lead a battalion of rats." Sarah felt sick. She wanted to tell them to shut up, to show some respect, but she stayed silent, just like the day before. She hated that about herself. The courtroom door opened, and the homeless man was led inside, still in the same dirty clothes, his hands cuffed tightly in front of him. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked slowly, his head held high like a soldier marching into battle. Judge Helena Warren entered a few minutes later. Everyone in town knew her. She was strict but fair, a woman who didn't tolerate nonsense in her courtroom. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, and her sharp eyes scanned the room as she sat down. "Bring the defendant forward," she said firmly. The man was led to the front of the courtroom. Sarah noticed that even though his clothes were torn and his shoes were broken, he stood straighter than anyone else in the room. Judge Warren looked down at the file on her desk, flipping through a few papers. Then she frowned. She looked up at the man, studying him carefully. "State your full name for the record," she said. The man spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "General Thomas Matthew Reeds, United States Army, retired." The room went completely silent. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She looked around. People stared with wide eyes, whispering in shock. Barnes and Mills froze, their smiles vanishing like smoke. Judge Warren stood up slowly from her seat. For a long moment, She just looked at him, then, to everyone's amazement, she placed her hand over her heart and gave a deep, respectful nod. "General Reeds," she said, her voice filled with something that sounded a lot like sorrow. "I served under your command during Operation Iron Shield. It is an honor to see you again, sir." Barnes and Mills looked like they wanted to disappear. Their faces turned red, and they stumbled backward a few steps. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She had known, somehow, she had known, that there was more to this man than met the eye. He wasn't just a homeless person forgotten by the world. He was a hero, a man who had once led others with bravery and honor, now treated worse than garbage by the very people he had fought to protect. Judge Warren turned her sharp gaze to the two officers. "I think we have much bigger problems in this courtroom today than any charges against General Reeds," she said. And for the first time since that terrible afternoon, Sarah felt a spark of hope in her chest. The truth was finally coming out. The courtroom stayed completely still, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Judge Warren took a slow, steady step forward. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, each sound like a hammer pounding in the ears of Barnes and Mills. "You too," she said, her voice cold as steel, "arrested a highly decorated war hero without cause. You mocked him, humiliated him, and treated him as less than human." Barnes opened his mouth to argue, but the judge cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "Silence," she snapped. "You will listen." Sarah watched, barely breathing, as the judge picked up a file from the bench. She opened it carefully, pulling out a worn piece of paper. It wasn't court documents. It was an official military record. "This," she said, holding it up for the courtroom to see, "is General Reed's service record. 3 tours overseas, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 Medal of Honor. He commanded hundreds of soldiers, including myself. He risked his life for this country more times than any of you can imagine." Gasps echoed through the room. People who had once looked away in disgust now looked on with wide, guilty eyes. Sarah's heart ached as she stared at the man. His hands were still cuffed, his clothes still dirty, but now everyone could see what she had felt from the start, that deep, unshakable dignity inside him. Judge Warren stepped closer to General Reeds. Gently, with great respect, she reached out and removed the handcuffs from his wrists herself. "I apologize," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "On behalf of this court and this town." General Reeds only nodded. His face was calm, but his eyes shimmered with something deep, something between sadness and gratitude. Judge Warren turned back to the two officers. Her gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. "You both will be placed under internal investigation for misconduct and abuse of authority," she announced loudly. "Until that investigation is complete, you are suspended from duty." The two young officers looked like they might faint. Barnes tried to mutter something about not knowing who he was, but Judge Warren cut him off again. "It does not matter who he was," she said, her voice rising with anger. "Every human being deserves respect, hero or not." Sarah blinked back tears. She felt those words sink deep into her chest. The judge was right. It was never about medals or uniforms. It was about seeing people, really seeing them, for the human beings they are. Judge Warren looked around the room, her gaze touching every single person. "Let this be a lesson to all of us," she said. "Kindness costs nothing. Dignity is not something you have to earn. It belongs to all of us." The courtroom stayed silent, the weight of her words pressing into every heart. General Reeds tucked the chain around his neck back under his shirt. Sarah noticed again the flash of a medal, not for others to see but for him to carry, his own quiet reminder of who he was, no matter what the world said. Sarah smiled through her tears. For the first time in a long while she felt proud of her town and hopeful that maybe, just maybe, people would start to change. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp bang, sealing her decision. Barnes and Mills stood there looking lost, like kids caught doing something terribly wrong. They shuffled awkwardly, their faces pale and sweaty under the bright courtroom lights. "Officers Barnes and Mills," Judge Warren said, her voice firm and final, "you are officially suspended, effective immediately. An investigation into your conduct will begin today. Until then you will not wear that badge or uniform. You have dishonored both." Barnes opened his mouth again, maybe to argue or beg, but one look from the judge made him snap it shut. The bailiff walked over and collected their badges and guns. Barnes hesitated, but the bailiff held out his hand firmly. Both officers removed their badges with shaking fingers and placed them into the bailiff's waiting palm. The metallic clink of the badges landing in the man's hand echoed through the quiet room. Sarah watched as they were led out of the courtroom, no longer laughing, no longer proud. She couldn't feel sorry for them. They had made their choices, now they were facing the consequences. Judge Warren turned back to General Reeds, her expression soft. "General," she said, "if you would allow it, this court would like to offer assistance, housing, medical care and anything else you may need. We owe you a debt we can never repay." General Reeds gave a small smile, the first real smile Sarah had seen from him. It wasn't wide, but it was full of warmth, like a tiny crack in a wall letting the sunlight in. "I appreciate that, Your Honor," he said quietly, "but I don't need much. Just a chance to stand on my own feet again." The judge nodded respectfully. "And that you shall have." Around the courtroom, people began to clap softly at first, then louder, until the whole room was filled with the sound of hands coming together. It wasn't the wild cheering kind of clapping, it was gentle, respectful, the kind you give to someone who truly deserves it. Sarah clapped too, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She knew this moment would stay with her forever. The man they had all once overlooked wasn't invisible anymore. He was seen, he was honored, and he was finally. Days passed after the hearing, but the memory of it stayed fresh in everyone's mind. The news spread through Maple Grove like wildfire. People who had once ignored the man on the sidewalk now spoke his name with respect. General Reeds. The town changed, little by little. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but something inside the people had shifted. Sarah saw it when she walked downtown. People looked each other in the eye more often, they smiled, they helped when someone dropped a bag of groceries or tripped on the curb, they noticed each other. Sarah sat outside the coffee shop one afternoon, sipping her drink and looking across the street. There, on the same corner where it had all started, stood a small memorial, a clean bench with a bronze plaque that read, "In honor of General Thomas Matthew Reeds, a true hero among us." It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was real. It was a promise that they would remember. She spotted General Reeds, sitting on the bench, wearing clean clothes and a pair of sturdy new boots. His hair was trimmed, and he looked stronger somehow, like a tree that had weathered 1,000 storms but still stood tall. He wasn't alone. A few children sat near him, listening closely as he told them stories, not about battles or medals, but about courage, kindness and standing up for what's right. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She picked up her coffee and walked across the street. When she reached him, General Reeds looked up and smiled that same small warm smile she had seen in the courtroom. "Mind if I sit?" Sarah asked. He shook his head. "Please do." They sat together in the afternoon sun, listening to the sounds of the town, laughter, talking, the distant hum of cars. It was peaceful, it was good. After a while Sarah spoke. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for not speaking up that day." General Reeds nodded slowly, as if he understood something deeper than words. "Sometimes the world teaches us in hard ways," he said. "What matters is that we learn." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but smiled anyway. She realized something then. True bravery wasn't just fighting battles overseas, it was fighting the small battles inside yourself, every single day. It was choosing to see people, to care, even when it was easier to look away. Maple Grove had learned its lesson, and so had she. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the town glowed in the soft golden light of evening, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should.